What's up YouTube community, Bernd here. Today we will dive into the very interesting topic of rhythm guitar playing once again, and I will show you some exercises that will really tighten up your riffs and chord patterns. Playing super tight to a click live and obviously in the studio is a big part of my job, and some of my students struggle a little bit with keeping time or really locking in with the rhythm section tracks while recording, for example. The following exercises are based on the note grouping system I introduced with the lesson on composing in odd meters like 7/8. This time we will keep it a little bit more simple, so let's check out what I prepared for you this week. The most important aspect of this particular exercise is understanding the system behind it. I did my best to show that visually in the editing process, but of course I'll break it down for you in detail here. I got inspired to record this video lesson when I gave a Skype lesson last week to my patron Sven. There we worked on this together, and I remembered that this is an exercise that helped me quite a lot a couple of years back. By the way, I still have room for 2 monthly Skype students on patreon.com/Bernd at the moment, so head over there if you want to work with me on any of those topics that we discuss on YouTube or on Instagram. When I'm talking about note grouping, I'm essentially breaking down a note value of my choosing into small groups of, for example, 2, 3 or 4 and so on. For this exercise I chose to work with eighth notes because it's the most basic approach, but we still get some pretty interesting results with it. When we work with eighth notes in the beginning, we often stick to groups of 2 and 4, and that can get boring real quick. The reason for that is the placing of the accents. When we choose to accent the first note of each group, like I did it in the practical example, we get something like that with groups of 2 and 4. A group of 2, for example, would be there I'm accenting the first note of the group by playing E an octave higher on the 12th fret on the low E string. A group of 4 would be, with the same system, and so on. So as you might hear or expect already by looking at this basic example, all of those accents, whenever we play E on the 12th fret, 1 octave higher, fall on places in the beat that are not that interesting rhythmically. In fact, they fall exactly on the click that is counting quarter notes when we limit ourselves to group of 2 and 4. To get more interesting patterns, we have to introduce groups of 3. With this uneven element, the accents I generate fall in between the straight quarter notes the metronome is counting, and this is the most basic approach to generate some nice syncopated riffs or beats. Quick but very important reminder, when I'm talking about groups of 3, I'm not talking about triplets. Those are naturally groups of 3, so 3 eighth note triplets equal 1 quarter note. We don't get any syncopation in that case. For this example, we stick to eighth notes exclusively and divide them into groups by clearly accenting the first note of each group. As I said, for my example, I chose to accent the first note of each group by playing E on the 12th fret on the low E string here, so 1 octave higher than the other notes. That way you can clearly hear the syncopation better. You could also just mute the other strings, for example, or play a chord instead. That's all up to you. This is just, as I said, my approach for this exercise. So when you start to visualize this system, we see that we can divide the 8 eighth notes in the measure completely to our liking. As long as we end up with a total of 8 eighth notes, nothing can go wrong. For my example, I chose 2 groups of 3 and 1 group of 2. That means we get 3 variations when we move the group of 2 around within the measure. I started out playing 2, 3, 3 with that group of 2 in the beginning. Here's that one again. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Then I moved the group of 2 in the middle and played 3, 2, 3. So here's that one. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. And for the last example, I moved it all the way back to get 3, 3, 2. Here's that one again. 1, 2, 3. And I'm always playing continuous down and up strokes, alternate picking. Another approach and also a great exercise would be to play a downstroke whenever a new group starts. For example, with the last pattern I just played for you, 3, 3, 2, this would look something like that. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. So a downstroke whenever a new group begins, but that's an example for another time. For now, please just stick with continuous down and up strokes for this exercise. Please make sure to include all of those exercises in your practice routine from now on and change them around on a daily basis. You can also stack them almost endlessly for a great workout for your brain to wake up in the morning. For example, playing 2-3-3, 3-2-3, 2-3-3, 3-3-2, 3-2-3, and so on in just a random different order every day. Just make sure to include an element to control yourself. It doesn't really help you that much when you end up making a mistake and play the whole sequence wrong. In my case, I programmed a MIDI drum kit, for example, to count quarter notes with the bass drum, but it also plays the patterns with the hi-hat. Open hi-hat for every accent or beginning of a new group, and closed hi-hat for the other notes. So by playing to that drum track, I immediately hear it when I make a mistake, and that's a great way for me to control what I'm doing. The drum track is online for all patrons to download if you want to practice with it. I can also focus a little bit better on nailing the eighth notes with this drum track, because I also get this pulse from the drums with the hi-hat. When you only work with a metronome, you usually want it to count only quarter notes. But that also works really great. You get some great results by just practicing with a metronome, so you absolutely don't have to do all of this extra work. It's just a suggestion. In the end of the exercise, I was also doing something quite interesting. The next step would be extending a syncopation over a couple of measures. With the first examples, we only focus on one measure with our note grouping. So as soon as we extend it over more measures, it gets really crazy, and there are tons of great possibilities for polyrhythmic odd meter style grooves that are actually composed in 4/4. But we only scratch the surface here by repeating the group of 3 until an accent lands on the first quarter note the metronome is counting in a beat again, or in other words, it takes 3 measures for this sequence to start over and over again. So that's also a really great exercise. I definitely recommend separating this exercise from the ones in the beginning when you start out. Let's hear that one again so you can hear and see what I mean. I really hope that you start to see the interesting possibilities we get from grouping the notes in different ways. As soon as you get more creative with the actual notes or chords you are playing, it gets really cool. This is a complex but actually very fun way of writing riffs, and will greatly help you with composing or improvising in odd meters too. Just a really quick basic example: if I would take a group like 3-2-3 and I would place a power chord on the beginning of each group, I could come up with a riff like that. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, and so on. And as soon as I start mixing up those groups, playing 3-2-3, 2-3-3, for example, for a riff, I could play something like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And that way I come up with some pretty interesting patterns. Then the drums would follow along, and it would be a pretty cool rhythmic section in my song. If you already want to work on some more advanced odd meters with this system, please refer to the lesson that I posted a couple of months ago. And also please let me know if we should cover more rhythmic topics on here. For now, that's all I want to show you today. The drum track and tabs, as I said, for this exercise are online on Patreon as always. Make sure to subscribe to stay updated for more free guitar lessons. Leave a like if you learned something new, or if you just enjoyed nerding out with me, or a comment in case I could answer any question for you. Thanks a lot for tuning in today, and I will see you very soon. Have fun practicing.